It's time for the Trust and Confidence panel, but this time we're talking about pay and pensions. So to tell us where we are at, would you please welcome Chief Constable Jeremy Vaughan, NPCC Lead for Pay and Conditions. And we also have Claire Alcock, who's the NPCC Head of Police Pensions. Welcome to you both. I'll let you take the stage and then we'll have some questions for you after that.
So thanks very much, everybody. I'm delighted to be here. The eagle-eyed amongst you will have spotted that I was a no-show yesterday. I should have been on the stage. My sincerest apologies. I was afflicted with COVID last week, and it knocked the stuffing out of me a little bit. But anyway, all at once, your president made me feel good and bad about it when I arrived, because he said, "Don't worry, you were probably one too many anyway." So thanks very much. And it worked, because I felt good for a second, and then I thought about what you really meant. Right, so I'm here to give a short input on pay and pensions. They are two very distinct and structurally, at least, different areas of business. I'm joined by Claire Alcock now. Many of you will have stood on the stage like me before, and you'll have said this. I've brought someone along who can answer the difficult questions. I really mean it. When it comes to pensions, I really mean it, because it is such a complex area of business. So we'll canter through this to come to some Q&A, and then Claire can perhaps offer her input in that. But first of all, I want to tell a bit of a story before I jump into it. 3 years ago, I was appointed as Chief of South Wales Police and took over from the very brilliant Matt Dukes, who said, well, good luck in your job, and I'm off to the Met. And by the way, I've got the lead on pay and pensions. You wouldn't mind taking it for me, would you? There's not a lot to it, really. So, okay, then. And that was bullshit. But he had me over that one. But there's been a lot more to it than we think. And here I am doing my best to navigate the difficult and murky world that is pay and pensions. So on pay, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the structure of pay, how we organise ourselves, speak a little bit about confidence in the current process and where we're at with that, and why we desperately all want that and desperately need that. I'll explain on how seeking a fair pay deal was at the heart of our strategy this year's, particularly in view of the fact that others around us were withdrawing their labour, were taking industrial action, as was their right to do, but not ours. I'll reflect a bit on this year's submission and what it gave us, and then talk a bit about the future before I then move on to the sort of complex world of pensions and remedy, if that's okay. You might not be able to see that in a great deal of detail, but this is just a bit of informative stuff here, because I'm not sure I really understood at the start, and I'm still trying to navigate my way through the complexity of governance in this space. So the Home Office, the Secretary of State for the Home Department, the Home Secretary, makes policy and determinations, and then lays regulations. The Police Remuneration Review Body, which sits just below that, the grey box to the bottom left of that, they advise and recommend on matters to the Home Secretary. An independent body with an independent chair, which I'll come back to no doubt shortly, or perhaps in questions. You've got the Chiefs Constables Council, who represent the employer. You've got that split, if you like, into two areas, the Finance Committee and the Workforce Committee. And then I sort of cut across both as a specific lead on pay and pensions, because a few years ago we realised we've got to try and get our act together better in the way that we organise ourselves in submitting evidence to the pay review body. You've got the Pay and Conditions Service Board, which is where the employer consults with the employees and vice versa. And you have got the Police Consultative Forum, where employers and staff associations come together with an independent chair to offer proposals on the future and views about the future. All of that complex governance structure is supported by a full-time staff of 2.5 people. The NHS have got 50 people in their pay and conditions infrastructure. We have 2.5 people. So much of the strategy this year, which I'll come on to, has been about getting together and grouping together as a group of people. And we need to do more of that, but I'll come on to it in a minute. So we all need the process to work for a whole host of reasons. We all want the same thing. Has been, without a doubt, the sort of guiding philosophy by which me and the team have approached this. Doesn't matter what our interest is, the Police Federation, Police Superintendent Association, SUPOSA, and the employer all want the same thing. And that is a well-remunerated group of people who do hard things for us and who are encouraged to join us and stay with us. This year, it feels to me like we've been much more united and collaborative. And even if the collaboration hasn't always manifested itself in the evidence submission, so not all parties gave evidence to the peer review body, behind the scenes, the discussions were frequent, were collaborative, were to try and get the right and the fair settlement for policing. And that was essential to our approach, because we'll talk a little bit about the outcomes of the process in a minute. If you operate on the principle that the evidence will speak for itself, won't it? So if we all say that police officers do a really challenging and difficult job and that they ought to have a pay premium because they can't withdraw their labour, then we need to draw out the evidence as to why that has been eroded over time, for example. And we can all do that, and we can all do that together. And I will say with confidence that this year we did that. So the starting position this year was this stat. Between 2010 and 2022, there have been a real terms pay cut to policing of 17%. That was the start, that was the thrust of our strategic positioning. We submitted our evidence in 3 parts this year, which again was different. The first was an overview of the workforce and our workforce objectives, which we were all pretty united on. The second, and this might sound subtle change, but it was a significant change, and was the question of affordability. So previously, and understandably and for good reason, the employer, represented by chiefs, has set out a position of affordability. This year we didn't. We set out a position about what should be a fair pay settlement for policing, and importantly, we respected the operational independence of the pay review body by not coming up with a number which was affordable but achieved a sweet spot by recognising the difficult role that police officers did. We said to the pay review body, that's your job. As an independent pay review body, it is up to you to determine what the right level is, and we shall submit the evidence that enables you to do that determination. So we spoke less about what was an affordable position, but both spoke more about affordability. So we described the state of the finances across policing and some brilliant work in that regard, the state of attrition in policing and the risks that we face in the future, but also the real terms pay cut over a number of years. And then finally, the report offered a number of pay point interventions and a forward look with that huge team of 2.5 people. Okay, so this is the outcome of this year's pay submission and recommendations to the Secretary of State. I will say this, and I really do mean it. We have had a huge amount of support from the Home Office, from the Policing Minister and the Home Secretary in achieving the pay settlement we achieved this year. As an employer, which is in all our interest for it to be a balanced book and affordable, that was, broadly speaking, funded by government. So I must acknowledge that from the outset. So there was an agreement to a 7% base pay rise for all ranks and pay points. I, as the leader, was particularly pleased that that was, broadly speaking, higher than other public sector organisations, because one of our strong lines of argument was the fact that policing cannot strike. And the fact that it cannot strike ought to recognise that that attracted a pay premium. And the fact that 7% was the outcome, which I'll come on to how that was arrived at shortly, was I think, a triumph for the process. There was an agreement to increase pay point 3 at chief superintendents. Again, following the evidence, the chief superintendent's rank over time had increased spans of command and decreased in number. when we looked at the independent assessment of the evidence about comparative market rates. There were two ranks that were outliers. One was chief superintendents, the other was chief constables. It's not right for me as a chief representing chiefs to vote on their own pay and conditions, which others led on, APCC led on that, but it was certainly right for me to lead on the chief superintendent's pay point and the intervention. So that was a recommendation from the employer, from MPCC, which was agreed by the pay review body or by the Home Secretary. The removal of pay point zero at the starting salary to make that a more competitive starting salary is still out of kilter with a number of police forces internationally, but it is significantly better than it would have been, minus 7% and including pay point zero as a starting salary. And then the Secretary of State, the Home Secretary, agreed to take forward a new pay structure for chief constables, but didn't really agree with the method by which that might take place. So that is in the hands of now a combination of SUPOSA, APCC and the Home Office. The employer, me, on behalf of other chiefs, have a role to play in Deputy Chief Constable's pay, which is a direct relationship between chiefs' pay, but broadly speaking, it is a matter being led by APCC. So they were the results from this year's submission and what some have described as quite a successful outcome for us. So what we must do in the future, whether I'm leading on it or not from MPC's perspective, is we must continue to work with the Super Association, the Federation and others in our submissions, in our building of evidence. You know, we have got a small team, I have mentioned it, but between us we've got resource that we can use if we turn it collectively to good effect, building evidence, gathering evidence and trusting and respecting the process. We're in the process of developing the next version of a strategic workforce assessment. We've set out, broadly speaking, the strategic intent should be to remain a competitive employer in what is a challenging labour market, to be an employer of choice. And of course, the things we've talked about, trust and confidence and perception of the service and policing, are important in that space. A specific focus on points of attrition, you know, where we might losing people in the early stages. So starting salaries will be back on the table in the near future, I am certain of that. And then build and retain and maintain specialist and investigative capability. But we must work together on that for the common aim. Okay, so I'm thinking doing okay time-wise. Pensions. So I understand, Dan, we've already given you the detail here and some of the financial detail. Dan represents you very, very well, is my view. He is an expert in his field, and you need Dan in the same way that I need Claire, and we all need Claire Alcock in this space, who can help with navigating a complex area. It is made all the more complex by this weird setup that you have with pensions, and that is, we've got 43 scheme managers, 43 chief constables in England and Wales. Those 43 scheme managers are bound to follow the regulations as laid. If those regulations prove to be discriminatory and unlawful, the 43 scheme managers are still liable for that discrimination. So what you've got is we're stuck with a regulatory framework that we have to operate within, but any discrimination apparent in the system lays at the door of the scheme manager. So if you think about that, 43 different chiefs now are having to figure out how they compensate people for errors within the scheme, where the money comes for that compensation, and so on. I have a really strong view about us doing that differently in the future. We need to have one Section 22 collaborative agreement for chief constables out there, where chiefs can more clearly outsource leadership in a legal framework for scheme management. So far, the discussion I've had with chiefs in that regard is positive, but of course, as you can imagine, there's lots of work to do to build that. Okay, so we're trying to bring a consistent voice, consistent engagement and consistent leadership and knowledge to this complex area. I strongly believe this. MPCC, we are better placed than we were 3 years ago, even though the autumn is going to be very challenging for all of us because we're deep into the implications of the remedy period. We have a central team now who are doing great work on behalf of us all. It's allowing us to take some management of the scheme. I've got a scheme managers steering group together who enable me to be able to see other directors of finance and representatives of chiefs together and get a consistent voice on behalf of policing about some of the decisions we make as scheme managers. So it's getting better. So the team are being focused on communications. There's stuff around remedy coming out, remedy calculators and so on. We'll take legal advice where necessary on a central basis, and increasingly we're doing that on a collaborative basis with others. Commercial scrutiny is a big issue for us because, of course, we've got the implications of remedy, which means that people have a choice about which scheme they operate within, and then we've got software suppliers who because the regulations are laid late, are struggling to develop the software in a way that we can push a button and get the answers to people's pension queries on a personal level. But we're then squeezing and putting some commercial scrutiny on those suppliers so they don't charge a fortune. Responding to Home Office consultation is one of the biggies that we've done, and a lot of peer support out there, and I've spoken a little bit about the future. Okay, I think this is one probably to cover in Q&A. It's something to take away. Active and deferred members will receive annual statement in August 24 and thereafter. This will help people to plan for the future. It is complex. It isn't where any of us would want to be. All of us want to be able to stand in a position here now today and know what the next 5 years is going to look like financially, but it hasn't been quite that simple, and Dan will have explained that to you. Website has been launched today. Please take a note of it. This has not been easy. And what has been really hard in many ways is that most people aren't interested about pensions until it affects them directly. They want answers to questions immediately, which I completely understand. Scheme managers, namely chiefs, become very interested when the problem lies across their desk, but perhaps until then, they're expecting others to lead it on their behalf. So this isn't easy. Bear with us. We are working really closely with other associations to try and make it as palatable as possible. And I'm squeezing now 3 minutes or so for Q&A.